I'm Kathy Moore from Climate Museum UK.
And I'm Chris McKean with Colchester Museums. And together we've been developing a pilot series of videos detailing our local natural history. Colchester Natural History Museum is being redeveloped with funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund.
The project focus is Wild About Essex. I wonder what that means to you and the children you teach. As a museum with a local focus on natural history, we wanted to find a particular animal to focus on that is important to Colchester's past, present and future. We think we found exactly the right animal and it might surprise you. But first, here's Chris with a brief explanation of the whole project.
The Colchester Natural History Museum first opened its doors in 1957, but its history dates back 800 years before that, as it's actually housed in a Grade II listed medieval church. From the museum's inception, it has focused on all aspects of British natural history with special reference to Essex. From the ancient past, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, to the present day and the risks of modern climate change. Telling the story of the rich biodiversity of Essex is achieved through our rich natural history collections, which tells stories unique to Colchester and the surrounding area, and contains specimens of national significance. The collections include taxidermy, skeletons, minerals, bugs and insects, plants, and of course my personal favourite, fossils, including the remains of mammoths and the largest shark to have ever existed, Megalodon. The museum is now in the early stages of a large-scale redevelopment project made possible by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. While the doors to the museum are shut, this video, alongside other learning and outreach events, will allow for the Colchester Natural History Museum to promote our natural history even while our doors are shut.
So, we have chosen to focus on the European flat oyster, also known as the Colchester Native Oyster. Essex Wildlife Trust is one of the partners in Wild About Essex, and they've designated the native oyster as a priority species. Thanks to the restoration efforts, oyster reefs are once again present in these areas of the Essex coast marked on the map. The UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, with many species having their numbers reduced or becoming extinct over the last few hundred years. The rate of nature depletion has only increased since the Industrial Revolution. As you can imagine, the level of depletion is true about native oysters as it is of many other species. In the not so distant past, Essex was teeming with a variety of different species of birds, mammals, fish and invertebrates, including many different species of animals and plants that you wouldn't even think existed in the UK, like wolves, bears and beavers. If you go even further back into the interglacial periods during the Ice Age, what we now call Essex was home to hippos, elephants and lions too. The Wild About Essex project at the Colchester Natural History Museum has many aims, and one of the most important is to inspire young people and older people as well to care about their local environment and contribute to the work of restoring it. As well as the many great things we'll hear about oysters in the rest of this session, this slide shows the many ways you can link oysters to the curriculum. The world really is your oyster here. There are the obvious ones in geography and science, but many other links are possible depending on how wide-ranging you want the study to be. Some ideas are listed here, with inspiration from history ideas across the next two slides from Chris. Numbers about oysters such as filtration rates, breeding cycle statistics, and those sorts of things can provide scope for maths exercises. Some of the many PSHE applications are shown here with the scope for thinking about rights and responsibilities. Engineers working on sea defences are now using the inspiration of oyster reefs in their designs. Additionally, I've been working on a model oyster for design and technology and science experiments, and will show you the progress so far at the end of this video. We will be building up a resource bank to help you with all of the above and more. I'll hand over to Chris now to talk through the history of oysters from the fossils in deep prehistoric time to how they feature in the recorded history of Colchester from Roman times to the present day.
Our story of when the first oyster appeared is going to focus on the last 538 million years, a period known as the Phanerozoic Eon, which is still ongoing today. We can split the Phanerozoic into smaller subdivisions known as eras, which can then be split into even smaller subdivisions called periods, which both the Jurassic and Cretaceous are examples of. The story of the oyster starts much earlier than that, however. During the Ordovician period, about 473 million years ago, which was when the first oysters evolved. We probably wouldn't recognise these oysters as the types we see in our oceans and on our plates in the present, however. These types of oyster that we would recognise, known as true oysters, didn't evolve until much later in the Jurassic period, approximately 239.5 million years ago, at about the same time as the first dinosaurs. From there, oyster species continued to evolve and change, including the well-known devil's toenail fossil that belonged to a species of oyster known as Gryphea. It was about 20.5 million years ago, during the Miocene epoch, which is an even smaller subdivision of a period known as the Neogene, that the native oyster evolved. This does mean that our oysters are older than mammoths, woolly rhinos, many modern animal groups, and even humans, which only first evolved 2.5 million years ago. Now, fast forward to the last 2026 years, and we can see how people in and around Colchester have used and benefited from the native oyster. The first evidence of oysters being farmed and eaten in Colchester comes from the Roman period, just 5 years after the Romans invaded Britain. The Romans used to prize our oysters so much that they would farm them in Brightlingsea, transport them into Colchester, and then send them all the way to Rome so that people could eat them in the capital of the empire. Today, oyster shells that are found in the ancient ruins in Rome can be traced all the way back to Colchester, Brightlingsea, and of course, the River Colne. The next important part of the Colchester oyster story comes in 1189, when Richard the Lionheart granted a royal charter to the people of Colchester, giving them the rights to farm the local oysters. From there, exporting oysters became vital to the economy of Colchester, with them being shipped across the UK and abroad. By 1682, over 4,000 bushels of Colchester oyster were being shipped overseas each year. The most popular location for our oysters, however, was London, where by the Victorian era, over 200 million oysters were being sold yearly. This led to over 50,000 people being employed in the Colchester oyster trade, and in 1845 it led to the first Colchester Oyster Feast, a feast that is still being held yearly to this day. Now, unfortunately, the 20th century saw a decline in oyster numbers. This was contributed to by catastrophic freezing weather in 1963, the introduction of the toxin tributylin into our waters in the 1980s, and the emergence of a parasite to the oyster in 1983. These and other events led to a decline in oysters across the UK and Ireland by up to 95%, with Essex now being one of the only remaining oyster populations. It's not all bad news, however. In 2011, the Native Oyster Restoration Initiative was formed to restore self-sustaining populations of native oyster here in Essex. In collaboration with local oystermen, conservation groups, the government, and scientists, this led to the establishment of a 284 square kilometre marine conservation zone, as well as bylaws to protect and manage our oyster fisheries, and the introduction of restoration boxes to help oyster populations grow. With continued support and protection, it is hoped that oyster numbers will recover and this historical and important species will once again play an important role in the life of modern-day Colchester and Essex.
Here is a simple food web for oysters. In addition to the algae shown here, oysters also feed on tiny zooplankton in the seawater, which makes them omnivores. Oysters are a key food source for animals, including crustaceans and fish. You can also see that oysters are shown as a food source for humans, as you've already heard about. All the elements in this food web are important, as each species plays an important role in maintaining the others. If you remove one species from the web due to something like extinction, it would have a direct impact on all the other species involved. The next few slides show 4 more ways in which oysters are important to our modern world. Oysters are what scientists call ecosystem engineers, meaning that they change the environment around them. And this has led the World Wildlife Fund to say that oysters have superpowers. The first way that they engineer their environment is by altering the structure of the seabed, also known as the substrate, by creating large oyster reefs, which they live within as a community. Through this, they provide the physical medium in which other marine species attach to or shelter in, therefore promoting new species to live in that area and promote biodiversity. When oysters build their shells, they help humans combat climate change in a very interesting way. You may have heard that many scientists are trying to develop ways in which to capture carbon dioxide artificially, to try to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere and the oceans, to reduce the amount and impact of global warming and climate change. You may know that plants naturally capture carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, but did you know that oysters and other shellfish do this too? They don't photosynthesize, but they capture carbon. Their shells are made from calcium carbonate, and they get the raw material to make their shells from dissolved carbon dioxide in the water. Once the carbon dioxide is locked in the shell of an oyster, it is taken out of the atmosphere and can no longer cause climate change. The rock limestone is made from ancient sediments and shells of ancient marine life and traps carbon dioxide as calcium carbonate. As shells and limestones remove carbon dioxide from the ocean and atmosphere, they are known as carbon sinks. Oysters not only remove carbon dioxide from oceans, but they also clean water too. Oysters are filter feeders, which means they take in a lot of water so they can filter out the tiny plants known as phytoplankton and the tiny animals known as zooplankton for their food. And while they're doing this, they also filter the seawater and remove nasty things like chemicals and pollutants. Last but certainly not least, oysters can play a key role in protecting our shoreline against the impacts of climate change. Climate change has led to rising sea levels, increased coastal erosion, and heightened flood risks over the last few decades, with scientists predicting this to become more common in the coming years. Oysters protect our coastline by acting as natural storm barriers. Oyster reefs off our coast reduce the energy of waves, reducing their strength when they reach the shore during storms and other events. By making the waves weaker, this slows down the speed in which erosion can occur, protecting our coastlines and homes from falling into the sea. Oyster reefs can also grow to keep up with sea level rise. Therefore, unlike a seawall, which will be submerged beneath the ocean once the sea levels rise, the oyster reef can continue to grow and protect us from erosion by storms and high waves. You've already heard about how much Romans and later generation of people in Essex and London loved eating our native oysters, as well as the world-renowned oyster feast. This takes place annually in October and came back to its original location at the Moot Hall last year. Nowadays, many people are trying to cut beef and red meat from their diets because they want to cut their carbon footprint, or they're concerned about animal welfare, or want to live a healthier lifestyle. Oysters are rich in protein and as such can be used as a sustainable alternative to a more traditional and less sustainable meats. Now we've finished looking at the importance of oysters, here are a few extra nuggets of information and fun facts about oysters. First, there's a little bit of old folklore. A traditional saying dating back to the 1500s was, only eat oysters when there is an R in the month. That's obviously September through to April. The reason for this was to avoid eating wild oysters in the summer months when they were breeding, and also to prevent food poisoning from oysters that quickly became rotten over that warm period. But nowadays we have fridges to stop oysters from going bad and know more about food hygiene, so it's safe to eat oysters all year round. Oysters are also known as sequential hermaphrodites, which means they can change their sex between male and female depending on the breeding season. This requires the individual oyster to change its biology, being female one year and male the following. Oysters are probably best known for making pearls. Pearls are made when oysters secrete a substance called nacre, which is mother of pearl, around a bit of grit or a parasite that's causing them an irritation within their shell. They can't easily eject that foreign object, such as grit or parasites, so they cover it with something smooth to stop the irritation. Over time, the nacre builds up enough to become a pearl, large enough to be used in jewellery. Oysters are an important species and are big news across the UK and other parts of the world. Here is a map showing the native oyster restoration projects across the UK. You can see that the Essex Native Oyster Restoration Initiative that we've already heard about is listed as number 1. In New York, in the USA, there's a very exciting community project involving a lot of local schools called the Billion Oyster Project. As the name suggests, this community project is trying to get the oyster population in the waters around New York back to 1 billion individual animals. Like in the UK, oysters have played an important part of the history of the United States. Did you know that early settlers and later industrial developers dredged the Hudson River for construction material, including lime, to make mortar? As the Hudson River was full of oysters, it meant their shells got used in construction projects such as Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan, which got its name because it's paved with oyster shells.
Thank you so much for listening. This video was put together in collaboration with Climate Museums UK and Colchester Museums and was made possible through funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Now I'm going to hand back to Kathy, who is going to show you her giant oyster model and what you can do with students.
That I've been working on of the oyster. So you can see it can open and close. We've got some nice shiny stuff on the outside to represent the oyster shell. Maybe that should really be on the inside because of the lovely shiny stuff that they usually have on the inside. But you can see on the inside what I have here is a coffee filter. I think I'm going to put a few more bits of that in there. And I'm going to use this and some water that I've put some things in to represent some pollutants and some sediment. And I'm going to make this so that I can filter through here and show in a kind of sort of some scientific demonstration for children how the oyster can filter. Also, I thought this might be quite an interesting design and technology project to have a go to help children make something that's hinged like this as well. So I'll be doing some more work on this, and hopefully there'll be a resource available for you to make one of these, or for your children to make one of these at school. And I hope that goes well.